Welcome to Conversations the World Over. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Tonight we bring you my interview with former Archbishop of Sydney, Australia, the man who many called the campaign manager of Pope Benedict's election and one of the most compelling figures in the Church today. Earlier this year, he was appointed prefect of the new Secretariat for the Economy by Pope Francis. In that capacity, he's charged with responsibility for managing the annual budget of the Holy See. And after watching this interview, I think you'll understand why Francis chose him for the newly created post. I interviewed Cardinal George Pell back in 2006 and spoke with him at length about everything from the role of faith in the public square to Islam to Pope Benedict XVI and his tendency to be rather outspoken on the issues of the day. He remains one of my favorite interview subjects, not only for his candor and his clear teaching, but for his great sense of humor. Here's my conversation with Cardinal George Pell. You had a very promising football career ahead of you. A contract was offered. Why did you decide for the priesthood?
Because I felt I should. I didn't particularly want to, and for some time I resisted that. Then my last year at school, two uncles died and a favourite teacher of mine died within a few months, and that provoked a whole sort of set of rethinking. And I'd been troubled by this thought that I should perhaps try to become a priest. And so I decided to give it a go. It was a very hard decision for me because I was probably a pretty selfish young man.
There was a turning point? Was there one turning point?
Well, these deaths, I think that was together they constituted a turning point.
Where did this love of history originate? You hold a doctorate in church history from Oxford, correct?
From Oxford, I do. Perhaps from my school days. I had an uncle I was very fond of. He used to write a bit. He was very interested in history and politics. And my mother was Irish-Australian, and often the Irish Australians are very much into their history and Australian history. And so I picked it up by osmosis.
Let's talk for a moment about that motto of yours. Be not afraid is there on the motto, and if anything exemplifies the public position and witness of Cardinal Pell, it is that motto, be not afraid. Tell me a little bit how that was chosen, why that was chosen.
Well, let me give you my official take on it. A lot of my friends, when I became Archbishop, were very pessimistic about the Church in Australia. They were frightened that we were finished. And some of my opponents were frightened that people like myself would finish it off. So I thought to attempt to speak to both of them, I would take this motto. Now that's superficial. Underneath it, of course, it was a great motto of Pope John Paul II. And of course in the scriptures, somebody said there are 352 references urging us not to be afraid in the Old and New Testament, the same number as the days of the year. I've never checked that,
that's something. But
it is surprising the number of times our Lord himself urged us not to be frightened.
Did that animate you, that the witness of John Paul, that particular message embodied in that motto, has that given you the strength, because you have been so outspoken on any number of issues, and not in a controversial way, but to simply stand in the public square and in a clear way articulate Catholic teaching?
Well, I think I'd prefer to claim that I'm not outspoken, but on occasions, please God, I've had the courage and the wit to clearly state what is the teaching of Christ and the teaching of the Church. Now, I think that's what a bishop is supposed to do. And there was a great archbishop in Melbourne, the nearest capital city, where when I was a young man, called Daniel Mannix, and he had quite a bit to say on public issues. So I admired him, and I remain a great admirer of John Paul II. I think he was I think he is John Paul the Great. I think he was one of the greatest popes in the history of the Church, and I think it was an absolute privilege to have been created a Cardinal by him and appointed a bishop and archbishop. I think great privileges.
Let's talk for a moment about your ability and the way you've been able to really engage the popular culture in Sydney. You write a column regularly for a secular paper.
I do. I write in the Sunday Telegraph, which is the largest circulation paper in Australia. So it's only a small column, and it takes a bit of doing each week on top of everything else to say something that's sensible and new and a bit different, but it's a marvellous opportunity.
Absolutely. And I've read them with great interest. The variety and the reach of them are really interesting. I mean, you've weighed in on everything from Harry Potter to the Da Vinci Code here.
That's right.
Let's talk for a moment about the momentous historical event that you were certainly involved in as a cardinal elector during the last conclave, and I was privy to from afar, from my rooftop. Right. We met there and had some wonderful conversations as you were going in and out of the...
Actually, I've had a lot of feedback, both here and in Australia, as a result of that interview of yours.
Really? You see that? All my viewers down under, they love you.
And not just down under, but also here in the States.
Oh, here in the States, yeah, indeed. No,
but also in Australia.
Yeah, no, they were very pleased with what you had to say, so I'm glad you agreed to come on again. Tell me, there was an Atlantic piece that came out recently suggesting that you were Benedict XVI's campaign manager. Your thoughts on your new title in the Atlantic?
Well, it's remarkable what people can dream up. I mean, I think that the Cardinals did well to choose the new Pope. And as you know, we're not allowed to comment. And I think the way persistent journalists build up a story is by going around to Cardinals and getting them to deny this and deny that and deny something else. And you put all the denials together and you've got
something.
You've got something. So I've decided not to really contribute to that.
What are your thoughts on this pontificate as we move toward the first year anniversary of Benedict's reign?
Well, he's starting slowly but surely. He's teaching magnificently. I think that nearly everything that he's saying publicly, he's writing himself. At least that's what it seems to me to be reading it, when reading it. Very big numbers of pilgrims continue to come to Rome. Now, I'm sure some of them are coming to visit the tomb of John Paul II, which is receiving, I believe, 20,000 pilgrims a day still.
Yes.
But there are very big crowds at the Sunday Angelus and the Wednesday audiences. And I knew that when the public came to see the personality of this Pope, they would be immensely reassured, because he's a thorough gentleman and a wonderful Christian. And he's got, after a lifetime of study and writing, he can speak on the deepest and most beautiful and important things very simply and elegantly. People generally know what he's about. He's a very, very fine teacher.
What do you make of this first papal encyclical on love of all things? Here was the great enforcer in the eyes of the media coming out and speaking on love. What if, first of all, and it was roundly dismissed, we should say, quick mention, and it was off the pages, no one talked about it again. What was the Pope attempting to do by committing this first encyclical, this really first public teaching act, to the nature of love?
Now, love is the centre of what we're about. I mean, obviously, he's laying the foundations for his teaching. Now, people said that that emphasis on love is innocuous. But he was speaking about a love that is exclusive, between a man and a woman, and permanent. Now, those in our society are not innocuous claims. I've been thinking about this, another, I think, factor is it shows just how deeply Christianity has penetrated, even into post-Christian Europe, where the editorial writers of most of the major papers in the English-speaking world, at any rate, can commend what is fundamentally a Christian insight, and that is that love is at the heart of the human story.
And in these days, a rather radical Christian insight.
The Christian teaching is still very, very powerful at all sorts of levels, and sometimes amongst people who don't recognise that, and even occasionally would explicitly repudiate it if they were challenged on the matter.
Do you think we're building towards something here? I mean, there were those who expected Pope Benedict to come out and very quickly lay down the law, get things straight, you know, roll through the Curia, the liturgy, make great strides. It doesn't seem to be happening in quite that timing or with that pacing.
No, that's correct. But we always knew that he was not going to be a John Paul II. We've also got to remember that he's 78. And I think he moves very carefully, he's very clear-headed, and when he's ready, he acts. And, you know, with the curial changes and that, he will have to act because, you know...
They're all out of time. They're all about to retire.
Not all out of time, but quite a number are. So I think he'll move through steadily.
Let's talk about Humanae Vitae. On the 30th anniversary of that pastoral, you were one of only 3 bishops in the world who wrote pastoral letters commemorating this historic and landmark teaching. Your thoughts on why others might not have been willing to commemorate this anniversary, and then your further reflections on where we are today in regards to that teaching.
Well, it remains a very, very controversial teaching.
Oh, sure.
And ignored also by many, many good Catholics, in inverted commas, who can't quite see the point of it. Now, increasingly, though, I think as time goes on, the significance of this encyclical, even in utilitarian terms, becomes clearer and clearer. When Pope John Paul II first spoke of the culture of death, I thought it was a bit over the top.
Why?
Well, I thought that it was just a bit too extreme. But in fact, what he was on about is now exemplified in Europe, where there's no country that is reproducing enough children to keep the population stable, and where some countries are dying. And the key, certainly lovemaking, is essentially tied up with the expression of love towards the other. But in the Christian and the Judeo-Christian view of things, that is also directed towards new life. Now, if you say that the production of new life is irrelevant to lovemaking, the whole thing topples over. Why should love only be heterosexual? Why isn't lovemaking just another recreational rite, another diversion?
You have said that this is a teaching that should be embraced, but those who perhaps don't embrace it fully should not be expelled.
Yes, well, that is the practice, that's been the practice of the Church since the teaching, and I think that's reasonable. But doesn't lessen the obligation to try to understand the teaching and to follow it. But as far as I know, nobody has gone around expelling Catholics from the Church because they disagreed with Humanae Vitae.
Yeah. Why do you think the Church hasn't been as bold and as forthright as you and a few others have in talking about the teaching? Is it fear of losing the flock?
I think there'd be something of that, but I think there'd be a more fundamental difficulty is that they're not clear in their own minds about its centrality and its long-term importance.
I see.
And as I said, I think that is becoming clearer as the population crisis, the falling of the depopulation crisis, becomes more apparent.
Let's talk for a moment, changing gears a bit. In the United States, the National Review Board, a lay review board that was set up by the bishops here to evaluate this whole sex abuse crisis, came to the determination that 80% plus, 82, 83%, were predominantly males who were abused. Therefore, they said this isn't necessarily pedophilia, though it is still young men that are being abused. It is homosexual in orientation. This recent document from the Holy See draws in very clear language a prohibition, if you will, on men with deep-seated homosexual tendencies. Your thoughts on this document, what the long-term impact could be on seminary life?
Well, first of all, as a preliminary point, the patterns of abuse are similar in Australia to what they are here. So they are predominantly the abuse of adolescent males, and therefore there is a clear connection with homosexual activity.
But you're not saying that homosexuals are pedophiles?
Certainly not. Certainly not. And as we know, in the wider community, most of the pedophilia is committed within families, and it's often fathers or senior males with daughters. Now, I'm not saying that at all. No. But there is a significant dimension of homosexuality in our problems. And now the document has spoken that we should not accept people who are actively engaged in homosexual activity, who openly support homosexual culture, and those with deep-seated homosexual inclinations. Now there is some ambiguity about what the last category means, but it's not there to be whitewashed out of existence. And if I think, as Father Newhouse wrote recently in New Things, you know, a crucial issue, not the only one, a crucial issue is, you know, do people believe homosexual activity is wrong? And if they do, then it must mean the orientation towards that is in some way disordered.
Now that we have this new regulation on the books, if you will, or this instruction on the books, how do you enforce it, Cardinal Pell?
By ensuring as bishops and religious superiors that the rectors in charge of your houses of formation accept this document and will apply it conscientiously and charitably. Now, any man who comes forward to become a priest needs to be treated with respect and indeed reverence. But with some of them, you'll have to say, well, in another age, church might be prepared to have taken a chance, but because of this, unfortunately, you know, that's not appropriate. But this is a defining issue for the future, and it's an important issue not just for the diocese, but also for the religious orders, because we can't afford a new wave of corruption or continuing corruption. We can't, I mean, it's wrong in itself. The last thing the church needs is more scandal.
There are some who say there are men who are willing to come forward and be priests. We have a priest shortage. If these gentlemen claim they will come in, even if they're homosexually tending, and they claim and promise to be celibate, they should be admitted to the seminary. You would say what to that?
Well, I'd say, look, life is not as simple as that. You can stand on one leg for 10 minutes, but you can't do it for a year. And so from your history, we have to conclude whether in moments of depression and isolation, difficulty in the future, you'll be able to live the Church's teaching. That was one of the mistakes that was genuinely, there were many other bad mistakes, genuinely made, the pedophilia crisis. People would be repentant and promised to do good, and because some of them were addicted, it was just impossible for them. Now, these are two distinct things we're talking about, once again, and I don't want to confuse them. But I think the document is written in a sophisticated, clear, Christian and charitable way, and it is there to be followed conscientiously and charitably. Now, there is some room to move. One swallow doesn't make a summer. We're talking about deep-seated tendencies and, you know, a significant record of activity. It would make it very difficult, I think, to accept any such person.
Let's talk for a moment, switching gears here, about Islam. We are seeing brush fires all across Europe, in the Middle East, as radical Islam takes hold in some of these countries, and not only in pockets, but actually in the ruling class of these countries. Your thoughts on whether we in the West are prepared to, first of all, properly evaluate the situation through our Western eyes and our Western prisms and understanding of democracy and society and civilization?
Well, I think a lot of the intellectual elite, the leaders of opinion in the Western world, are spectacularly under-equipped to deal with Islam because they regard religion as unimportant. They don't think any serious person is religious, or even sometimes that it makes any difference. Or sometimes the more ignorant ones among them think all religions are the same. Now that's manifestly not true. Good religion is enormously powerful and purifying. Bad religion can be poisonous and absolutely destructive, especially, you know, well, we've seen when it's tied up with terrorism.
Sure.
So we face a profound challenge, and I think Western thinkers and leaders who do have who are Christians and understand religion have something of an advantage in coming and dealing with the Islamic threat.
Do you believe that one can export Western democracy to what is essentially an Islamic culture?
Well, there are many types of Islam, and with the more radical types of Islam, I think it's clearly incompatible. But I mean, Turkey and Indonesia are great democracies, not perfect, but huge countries where most of the population is Islamic. So it can be done. And most of the people in Iraq were very, very happy to vote. Now what
the outcome is another issue.
We will see.
What of the church? How should the church engage Islam? Is it possible, when there are elements within Islam, very vocal, powerful elements, persuasive elements saying, this is the infidel, we must declare jihad, and when the Quran seems to indicate to do violence to these people is a good?
Well, there are different parts of the Quran. There are many verses urging peacefulness. There are the so-called verses of the sword, very, very strongly worded and against idolaters, against Christians and Jews. A fundamental question, I think, for Islamic commentators and writers and partners in dialogue is to explain the relationship between these two sets of verses. And then we go on from there.
Let's talk for a moment about intelligent design, which we've been hearing a great deal about in the United States. There are some who wish it to be taught as part of science and science courses. The Vatican, in L'Osservatore Romano recently, the official Vatican newspaper, said this is not a good, it should not be taught as part of a science curriculum. Would you agree with that?
Well, it depends what we mean. Now, I just recently in the Daily Telegraph in London, I read a very fine piece on it, which defined it in such a way, it says it doesn't need the hypothesis of God, that it can be taught, that it's a purely scientific argument. There are many things in the development of nature that, one, cannot be explained by random mutation, by chance, by the traditional theories of evolution. Can't be explained. For example, in the development of some complicated bodily mechanisms, you need 12 or 13 or 14 stages for the whole thing to work. And the intermediate stages, there's no advantage to nature in them at all. They only become significant when they're all put together. Now, this scientist was saying, when we look at that, the only hypothesis that we can use is to say that this was put together by an intelligence. Now, he also says, now whether you go on beyond that and say, yes, it was put together by an intelligence, and that intelligence is God, that is not physics or chemistry, that is metaphysics, that's philosophy, or perhaps theology. But certainly a variant of intelligent design can be taught in purely scientific terms by pointing to these remarkable things that cannot be explained by present theories of evolution.
And it should also be said, L'Osservatore Romano, an article there, it's not necessarily dogmatic teaching. It's simply a conjecture that is part of the official Vatican newspaper.
That's correct, and I think Cardinal Schönborn has said a number of interesting things which would probably tilt in a different direction. I think it's early days in this. Now, I think what has been significant from a political point of view has been the hysterical attacks from a few evolutionists on intelligent design. If a person is secure in their arguments, confident of what they're about, you don't need to be abusive. It was a sign to me that people were just a little bit nervous because attention is being focused on those matters that evolution cannot explain at this moment.
As a cardinal who has willingly come forward and spoken out on cultural issues and at times contentious public issues, do you have a rule of thumb that you use to determine at what point you or the Church should wade into political matters, let's say?
I've got 2 or 3 rules of thumb. One is that politics is primarily a task for lay people, not for the clergy. Secondly, there are some moral issues where I think it is important for an archbishop to speak. Not at sermon time. And it is difficult to know sometimes when that should be the case and when not. And also personally, the presumption in my case is with whoever is in government. I know how hard it is to actually run things and to do things. So I think it's a mistake for church leaders to be seen automatically as members of the opposition. A reporter asked me that recently, and I said, no, we're not part of the opposition. We're there to comment on what the government does, what the opposition does, what all the players do, and to try to contribute positively towards better outcomes and towards Christian outcomes and what's in the public good.
Very good. Cardinal George Pell, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Let me know what you thought of tonight's show and which of our interviews you'd like to see in the upcoming editions of Conversations the World Over. You can always write me at Raymond@RaymondArroyo.com. The new show premieres each Wednesday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern Time in the U.S. For those outside the U.S., go to EWTN.com for other air times. Next week, the conversations continue with Rock and Roll Hall of Famer, singer and songwriter, the Wanderer himself, Dion DiMucci. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, I'm Raymond Arroyo. The conversations continue. Don't miss them. Bye now.